Her Hoop Stats fans, welcome to another episode of Her Hoop Stats Unplugged. As always, you're here with Megan Gauer, and we have officially wrapped up the first weekend of the Women's NCAA tournament. Lots of upsets, lots of exciting games, and we are on to the regional round, Sweet 16 and Elite 8 coming up this weekend. But to start off, we're of course going to break down everything that happened this weekend. So to do that, I am here today with Calvin Wetzel. Hey, Calvin, how's it going?
Hey, I'm good, Megan. How are you doing?
Doing good. Operating on not much energy this morning. We got a late tip at stores last night, so I'm home at like 1:30 a.m., which is a little bit of a challenge to the day job today, but we're doing it. So if you see me drinking coffee in this video, that's why.
But those day jobs will get you.
Yeah, definitely getting me this week. But I mean, it's very exciting. First weekend of the tournament. We're down to 16 teams, but so many upsets, I think, and also very many near upsets in the last 4 days. So that's where we're going to focus our time today. Obviously, there's so much to talk about. We can't talk about everything, but I want to focus on those double-digit seeds that pulled off some pretty big wins.
Yeah, there's I'm all about that as a mid-major fan. And this is, we've been going in that direction in the women's game, but to see it sort of finally coming to fruition to some extent, it's just really exciting. Even with all the ones that we just missed, still had plenty of good ones.
Yeah, exactly. I think we saw very quickly in this tournament that the top of some of these mid-major conferences is not far from the top. Really, the top of some of the big Power 5 conferences with the upsets we saw, but definitely that middle tier as well. I think, the bottoms might be further off from the bottom of like a power conference, but these teams are out here competing, and if they didn't pull off the upsets, they were all close games. I actually think those games were closer than like the 4 or 5 games yesterday in the second round. So
yeah, I think those are the two biggest blowouts, especially
Notre
Dame Oklahoma. Oh my
yeah, that was something else. But yeah, all right. So to start, I feel like we have to start with the two 10 seeds that are going to the Sweet 16. So double the upsets. Not that I really call a 7 versus 10 quite an upset. I feel like it kind of falls in that range that it's something that happens pretty often. But the second round ones over the two certainly upsets there. And starting with a team that's not technically a mid-major because Creighton plays in the Big East, and I don't think we're going to call any conference that UConn's playing in a mid-major conference. But Creighton, 10 seed, I still think falls in that kind of category of teams people probably haven't watched as much, maybe weren't expecting. They upset Caitlin Clark in Iowa in the round of 32 in a sold-out gym on their home court too, to add on to that. So that was a very exciting game. I'm going to take a victory lap on this one too, because I called it on Twitter the night before. But I think just a game that the matchup really worked in Creighton's favor.
Yeah, shout out to you for calling that. And they also did it on the back of Lauren Jensen, who came from Iowa, transferred to get more playing time, and then said, "Hey, Iowa, why didn't you play me? Look what I can do on your home floor." Hit the game-winning shot, scored, I think it was 19 points. What a cool story. But you're right, Creighton is in that category. We talk about mid-majors, and I always, on one hand, I do feel like mildly annoyed when people talk about the Power 5 in college basketball, because Power 5 is a football thing. Like the Big East is a power conference in basketball. But at the same time, in women's basketball, it's not, Big East isn't quite the same as what it is in men's basketball. And it's not a mid-major for sure, but it's also one of those conferences that after UConn, like you said, these teams, and half of this is based on what services and channels you can get them on, but these teams just aren't really on national TV. We talk about Flow Hoops and whatever else you gotta, wherever you go, gotta go find to see some of the mid to low tier teams in the Big East. It's not going to be ESPN, not during the regular season. So a lot of the national audience who kind of only tunes into those big time games hasn't seen anyone in the Big East outside of UConn, which then puts them in that same category, like you said, of teams like, wow, I had no idea they were good. I've never seen them. How did they beat Iowa? Because they were good, but they just weren't good on national TV. They were good behind the scenes and no one knew. So it's definitely really exciting to see now that the last couple of years, the tournament has all been on national TV, ESPNU or ESPN News at worst, that everyone can see these teams who they didn't know were good and maybe sort of start to realize that there's some legit talent outside of those top 10 teams that always get talked about.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Creighton is a perfect example of that, where this going into this Iowa matchup, I think what made it such the potential for the upset and then actually the upset is that they're one of the few teams in the country that can keep pace with an Iowa offense. They're, I think, 5th in the nation in points per 100 possessions. So they're right up there with Iowa in terms of their scoring. And then a little bit actually better defensively than Iowa. Not that that's saying a whole lot considering Iowa's defense. But that was the other thing about this matchup that kind of jumped out at me was the Creighton's a really hard team to defend. And I think something I've seen from watching them in the Big East and watching them play UConn. I actually remember when they played UConn at home this year, they were like really getting around the Huskies in terms of a really solid defensive team and getting in these backdoor cuts, getting threes down from the perimeter. And I thought, like, when I was watching the game, I was like, UConn is not guarding them well at all. And then remembered going into the press conference afterwards and Gino being very pleased with the defense, which is one, something that doesn't happen very often. And two, like, I was like, wait, what? But obviously I'm not going to argue with Gino. He knows a lot more about basketball than me. But I think it kind of just goes to show how difficult of a team they are to guard, because they can score from all 5 positions, because they can score the ball in so many different ways. You put a team like that against a team like Iowa that doesn't play a whole lot of defense, they're going to be able to keep pace with the scoring. And then were able to contain Caitlin Clark just enough for that they pulled off that upset.
Yeah, and that's all coaching on both sides of the ball, really. Jim Flannery just is an outstanding coach, and when you have 5 players moving and cutting and shooting well, it can make up for a little bit of talent. And when you have an excellent game plan like they did on defense, maybe some Iowa fans might not be happy with the physicality of that game plan, but the way that they were able to at least contain Caitlin Clark a little bit by just throwing bodies at her and sort of helping off Kate Martin a little bit. I mean, it's a great game plan and it worked. So absolutely respect to Creighton's coaching staff, not just Flannery, the whole coaching staff for that.
Yeah, I mean, and in my opinion, it's March. It's going to be physical. That's how it is. I much prefer the way it was called in that game than like last night at UConn with a lot of people, which honestly, my biggest gripe with that is the fact that like it was a 9 p.m. tip and I could have been home probably by like 1 if we didn't blow the whistle every 30 seconds instead of 1:30. But anyway, but it's going to be physical. And a team like Iowa, I think I would have never really picked them to make it to like a Final Four, because I think you have to play defense at this time of the year and you have to be physical if you're going to win kind of these big games as you go forward, and part of why I think they get knocked out early. But in terms of other 2 seeds that go down, South Dakota over Baylor. This one I cannot say I had on my bingo card at all, and not because South Dakota is not a good team. I just thought Baylor was playing well coming into this tournament, but I mean, South Dakota just led that game wire to wire. Baylor could never come back.
Yeah, I went back and forth on this one on my bracket and went with Baylor, not because I didn't go back and forth because I really actually thought South Dakota had like an over 50% chance to win or anything. I thought they were just way underpicked. I forget what the percentage was, but it's all about how much of the public is picking them. They have a 30% chance to win and 10% of people are picking them. But I was kicking myself because obviously I ended up landing on Baylor. Either way, I mean, South Dakota is good. Like you said, the top of some of these leagues and in the summit, when you talk about South Dakota and South Dakota State for the last several years, those 2 teams are really, really just good at basketball. Like, it's not any more deep than that. And, people want to try to figure out, like, how did they do it? They're just good at basketball. It's like what the Kelly Graves quote that I put on Twitter. But the thing that I think helps South Dakota too is that a lot of times with these mid-majors or maybe Creighton or whatever you want to call this category that we're talking about, they have to, they're smaller, they're giving up size. And so they have to make shots, they have to be disciplined, they have to find ways to make up for that, which a lot of them do. But South Dakota, like Hannah Shervin in the middle, isn't giving up size. And she went toe-to-toe with Shakira Austin, who's going to be a lottery pick. She went toe-to-toe with Melissa Smith, who's going to be a lottery pick. And South Dakota, like size, talent, there's no deficit there. There's no gap. Like, it's just a good team. And they were really helped too, I will say, by the COVID year, because Shervin and Chloe Lamb and Liv Corngable, that's their big three, their three-headed monster. They're all fifth-year seniors who came back with that COVID year. So really cool to see that year kind of help out some mid-major teams like that. But I was looking through our Her Hoop Stats model. This is my little soapbox real quick. I know you, me, and Jen have talked about having like a soapbox pot. I think this is about the closest thing we're going to get to it. People are always like shocked by all these upsets. I even saw one tweet like, I could not have told you that there was a University of South Dakota. I didn't know that existed. Like people like haven't even heard of these schools because all they do is watch, like we said, watch national TV games. Here's why it's not shocking though. Like, and I'm not trying to say like I'm smart, I picked it, because I didn't. But number one, like things that have less than a 50% chance of happening happen all the time, right? Like almost every 3-point shooter is not a 50% shooter, and no one's shocked when like a 35% shooter makes a three. So it's just not a big deal when something that has less than 50% chance of happening happens. Number two, looking through our Her Hoop Stats model, so this was the 244th biggest upset of the year. And there's been like 130 days of the season. That means we've had more than one of these a day on average. So like it was high profile because it was Baylor and it was March, but it really wasn't that big of an upset comparatively to the whole season, because South Dakota is just good. They're a good basketball team, and they were probably underseeded in terms of team strength. So I hope that if something comes out of all this, that maybe like your casual fans start to realize that what you said on the top, that the top of some of these mid-major leagues, the top of the Atlantic Sun and of the Ivy and of the Summit, can compete toe-to-toe with any power conference team, even if the middle or the bottom of some of those leagues is weaker.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's been very much on display so far in this tournament. And like you said, like we've seen so many upsets this season. Like I don't think this is a bigger upset than like Tennessee losing to Auburn. Like when that happened, like this is not that seismic of an upset. It's obviously, like you said, higher profile. But yeah, I feel like as a women's like game too, we just need to embrace the upsets a little bit more. Like you think about the men's side, like all everyone's talking about right now is like the Peacocks and St. Peter's, like instead of making it all about like Baylor losing and Iowa losing, like why aren't we talking about like the Blue Jays and the Coyotes like that? Like that's what we need to get to, I think, too, is like the next step. Now that it's happening, like you gotta, there's always that team on the men's side, whatever it was Loyola a few years back, the sister team, there's always like some storyline that gets embraced and everyone just like really jumps on the bandwagon, and we haven't really seen that, I feel like, this year.
Yeah, no question. And you brought up a good point with the men's side. Like St. Peter's, what's that kid's name? Doug Edert or Eater? That kid who's been making all the shots for them. They had CBS had like a, I don't know, 5 to 10 minute little feature on him ready to go for game 2 after they beat Kentucky. Like there's no way they just made it on the spot. Right? They, like he wasn't doing those interviews that day. So just on the off chance that they beat Kentucky in the first round, they just had this thing ready to go. Imagine if ESPN, instead of putting all their time into, no offense to UConn fans, Paige Becker's features and Aaliyah Boston features and Caitlin Clark features that end up being irrelevant because Caitlin Clark loses before the Sweet 16. Imagine if they also put some time into making like a Chloe Lamb feature just in case South Dakota makes the Sweet 16 and had that ready to go. How cool would that be? And I think now that we're seeing more of these upsets, like the men's side, hopefully the media side of things can embrace it, like you said, in terms of actually giving some shine and some spotlight to some of these players on these mid-majors teams who have really cool stories that maybe don't get told because the narrative is all around the National Player of the Year candidates or whoever else.
Yeah, exactly. And I think hopefully, I mean, that's been right the next direction. So we're starting to see these upsets all the time. So you've got to move, I think, in that direction with the media attention. So hopefully that's what we're going to see going forward. And we've got a week before next weekend. So hopefully we'll see some of it. Maybe I don't want to get upset too much.
Yeah. I'll just say too, when I was watching, I don't know if you saw this, if you were watching Baylor, South Dakota, when they put the stats on the screen or whatever, or maybe it was another game and they did a little flash over to the stats. And they had under the game score, they have like the top 2 players in stats, right? So they have like Melissa Smith and I don't know, Queen Egbo or whoever, and Hannah Schroeder and Chloe Lamb. And they had pictures of Melissa Smith and whoever the other one was. And they didn't have pictures of the South Dakota people. And that's not even a feature. That doesn't even take time and effort and work and editing. Just get a picture. Like you can have a picture of all 68 teams ready to go. That's like some low-hanging fruit. But they didn't, because they just weren't expecting South Dakota to play Baylor. They weren't expecting to need that. So I don't know. That I would like to see just a little bit more. We talk about equity between men's and women's, and that's a big deal. And also, how about just equity in terms of at least tournament coverage, if not regular season, between teams like South Dakota and teams like Baylor.
Yeah, and I think that's, I don't know, an area, probably a different podcast after, but like I feel like the NCAA is missing the mark a little bit on the NCAA or on the equity stuff. Like it doesn't mean that everything has to be the same as the men's tournament, which is how it seems to be interpreted. It's you can do things different and it's still equitable. But anyway,
that's a whole other soapbox. Yeah, you're right though. I'm right there with you on that. It's may or may not be well intentioned, but anyway.
Well intentioned, but I think missing the mark a little bit still.
I'm not even sure if it is well intentioned or not, but
yeah, fair.
Topic for another day. We're at least moving in the right direction, I think.
Yes.
Slowly.
Yep. All right. But going back to the first round, those were the 2 biggest in the second round. We almost saw some more ones in the second round yesterday. Didn't quite get there. One of those, Belmont took Tennessee right down to the wire. The last minute of that game literally took 40 minutes, but Belmont couldn't quite pull it off. Missed some 3 throws at the end. I think a common thread that we saw in some of the upsets that fell just a little bit short yesterday, but they take down Oregon in the first round. So that was a big upset in itself. I think Oregon, a team a lot of people, myself included, thought could get hot in this tournament, but they bow out very early in the first round.
Yeah, and Belmont's just another team. It's really talented. Destiny Wells is really good. And they're coming to the Missouri Valley next year, so I cannot wait to see them in person here in town, because it's fun. Their little social media hashtag or whatever, Splashville. And I mean, it's a fun squad. Tootie Jones is a star. But yeah, they went toe-to-toe. Obviously, they beat Oregon. It went toe-to-toe. If you knock down 2 free throws at the end of the game, go up 4 instead of being up 2, you knock off Tennessee on their home court. What was cool to me about this too, and maybe Belmont had a slight advantage here, but I don't want to take anything away from what they did. Obviously, Tennessee and Belmont are in state, so Belmont had a lot of fans, even though it was a road game. I mean, it was a road game, but Oregon had to travel way further than Belmont, and Belmont brought it. I don't know how much you were able to watch when you were in the arena at UConn, but that section was hopping. And Belmont Betty, I saw her on Twitter. She was lit. That was cool. I love seeing mid-majors with, get that kind of support, especially on the road. So I think Belmont's going to be around for a while, though. I mean, Destiny Wells is a sophomore. I know they got a couple good seniors, but that's just a program. Yeah,
I mean, it's the second year in a row they pull off a big upset in the first round. I forget who they beat last year, but they did it last year too.
Gonzaga,
yes. Yeah. So did it last year too. Like you said, they're gonna be around, and the crowd was awesome. I was able to watch most of it yesterday because we were up in the media room eating and watching that game before the UConn game tipped off last night, and just a really fun game. Obviously, just didn't quite pull it off against Tennessee, but I mean, a team that's very clearly a very good team, right? 2 big upsets. They too, I think you look at a team like Creighton or South Dakota, and they had to knock off a 7 in the first round, and then they do knock off the 2, but that's a 5 and a 4 that Belmont almost knocked off. So 2 teams that are considered to be, I mean, that's the second best team in the Pac-12 and the second best team in the SEC that they almost knocked off. So
yeah, and I mean, Belmont's a 12 seed too, and you look at Creighton and South Dakota, as maybe unknown as they were at-large teams. Right. South Dakota would have been if they needed to be at-large caliber teams, maybe I should say. Mm-hmm. They were getting in the tournament either way, as 10 seeds. Maybe South Dakota drops to an 11 if they don't win their conference championship game, whereas Belmont wasn't. When you look at where they were as a 12 seed, if they didn't win that OVC championship, they were going to be in the WNIT. Can you imagine a team that talented at WNIT? That's actually, I think, what we have right now with South Dakota State in the WNIT. But it's just what the deal is with until the committee starts, or maybe I should say stops putting so much weight on strength of schedule and compared to the weight that they put on how you played against that schedule. We're going to keep seeing teams like South Dakota State miss the tournament, teams like Belmont get a 12 seed, teams like FGCU get a 12 seed, teams like Princeton get an 11 seed, because it doesn't matter how good they are, they played a weak schedule, and so they get underseeded, which is a whole nother soapbox, but it does give us some more upsets too. So
yeah, I mean, I don't think I can roll my eyes far enough into the back of my head about Florida being a 12 seed. I feel bad for Virginia Tech in that matchup because they just got like the very short end of the stick as a 5 seed. There's no way you should have to play Florida Gulf Coast as your 12. That was absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, I think we're seeing that a lot. I feel like a lot of the mid-major teams just feel very underseeded this year, and I think that's one, not respecting that the top of these conferences are really playing at the level that are kind of, up with some of the top of these power conferences. But just like, I think part of it comes from the scheduling too, because these teams, I think, try to schedule harder in their, upfront in their non-conference slate to make up for the fact that they play in these leagues. But it feels like, to me at least, from the Power 5 teams, you get your power teams, like your Baylors, your Stanfords, your Tennessees, your South Carolinas that want to schedule these harder mid-major opponents at the beginning of the season because they want to try to get quality wins in the beginning and they want to test themselves. But then I think when you start getting to the middle of your Power 5 leagues, you don't really see teams scheduling these harder mid-major teams to play because they don't have to, right? They know that they're going to play in the SEC, they're going to play in the Pac-12, and the committee is going to respect that strength of schedule. So they don't need to get these harder games in that they could lose at the beginning of the season. They're going to play their cupcakes and win and then use the strength of their conference schedule. But I think I would like to see that change, and I don't know how, because the numbers don't really seem to reflect it on the net and stuff, but I don't know how you get to a place where it changes. But I think that if you have teams other than a South Carolina that are obviously going to kill us, well, not kill, but are going to beat South Dakota in the preseason. But if you're going to play a team that's in the middle of the SEC, South Dakota probably wins that game, but they have to be able to schedule it.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And I'm glad you're with me on this soapbox, because I'm pretty sure we're not big enough for this to happen, but on the off chance anyone on the committee ever sees this, strength of schedule does not matter.
Yeah. It does matter, but yeah, it's honestly, to an extent, right?
I mean, to me, I don't know. I don't even know if I think it matters at all, because here's the thing, if a team, just hypothetical team A, plays nothing but the bottom 20 teams in the country, teams ranked in the 300s, and they beat them all by 85.
True.
Team A is still really good. Who cares that they didn't play anyone good? They're still a really good team, and in terms of team strength, could probably compete with the top 40 teams in the country. They just happen to not have played them. But to me, it's not about who did you play, it's about how did you play.
Yeah,
and
that's fair.
The committee loves to look at who did you play and just forget about how well you played against the who, right? Which is why all these mid-majors are underseeded, because FGCU, they played awesome all year, but they played awesome against an A-Sun that, outside of maybe Liberty and one or two other teams, didn't provide very much competition. So they didn't care that FGCU was beating everyone by 30 plus, and that they got a first round WNBA pick. They didn't play anyone. That's where you are. They didn't play anyone. Who did they play? How many quad one wins? Whatever. But they're a really good team. That's the bottom line. So I'm with you. I would love to see something change in that regard. And like you said, a lot of these power conference teams aren't willing to play these really good mid-major teams, because the casual fan, this is another part of this Kelly Graves quote, right? The casual fan maybe doesn't know that South Dakota was good, maybe hadn't heard of South Dakota as a school. But who does know that South Dakota is really good is every power conference coach. They know that FGCU is really good. They're not surprised at all that Creighton beat Iowa, right? Because they know the strength of these teams, and they know that if they go try to play a team like Belmont in the non-conference season, that they might get got. So they just don't do it. And something needs to change. You're right. I don't know what. It's a tough process to figure out what maybe the solution is, but right now it's really hurting mid-majors, and it's really hurting the Virginia Techs of the world who have to play these vastly underseeded mid-majors.
Right, these power conference teams that do belong at the seat that they got and get placed with someone that should not be what you should be rewarded with for earning a 5 seed in the first round. I think the other example of that is Princeton too. At 11 felt extremely low for Princeton, and a perfect example of not just who you play but how you play. I think they rolled through the Ivy. I want to say they like averaged a margin of victory in conference play like something ridiculous, like 27 points, which the Ivy is like a decent conference top to bottom too in terms of their depth and as a mid-major conference. So again, how you play, not who you play. And then I don't think Kentucky should have ever been a 6 seed anyway, so I'm less than surprised by this. It doesn't even feel like an upset. It feels like what should have happened. Princeton was the better team and they won the game.
Yeah, I mean, our model had Princeton winning.
Yeah.
Betting sports books basically had this as like even to start with, and then everyone bet on Kentucky for some reason. I guess because Kentucky was the story, no one heard of Princeton. So Kentucky ended up favored by 2.5. Either way, any sort of like prediction type of thing that you look at had this as a really close game. So, but the other thing that, while I'm just unloading all my soapboxes here, we always get these alerts and stuff that say like, oh, so-and-so shocks so-and-so, or so-and-so stuns so-and-so, right? Like Princeton stuns Kentucky. Like,
no one was stunned.
I don't know if it was really a stunner. I think Princeton's just a better basketball team. I like Kentucky would have stunned Princeton if Kentucky won. That's what I think. But it's easy to just not get out your thesaurus and use words like that when the team that won had a higher number on their seed line.
Exactly. I think anyone that was kind of paying attention to the broader picture this year kind of like had that Princeton one circled for sure. They were just, Princeton was a very good basketball team this year, and to see, Kentucky got high at the right time, and I get that's why they got 6, but I think their conference tournament performance got overweighted a lot in that seed line, in my opinion. We were talking about a Kentucky team that like going into that conference tournament might not even got into at-large bid, and then they end up as a 6 seed because they win 3 games in 3 days, which like respect to them, because that's winning the SEC is a big deal, but at the same time 6 seed was a little overzealous.
Yeah, and like the South Carolina win in particular was a really, really good win
Right.
on the resume, and I'm sure that's what got them up to the 6th seed. So I don't want to take away from that, but who else had a win over South Carolina is like Missouri, and they didn't get into the tournament. So
which is
obviously
fine.
The committee,
Missouri didn't need to be at the tournament, but yeah,
it is fine, but it's a little bit weird to see the committee really overvalue a South Carolina win for one team and not the other. Part of me thinks, I don't know, Ryan Howard effect, just potential number 1, maybe number 2 pick.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the committee is all human beings. So they hear all the narratives, and they like, as much as they try to be objective, human beings can't be objective. And I wouldn't be either. If I were trying to do this, I wouldn't be able to be objective either. I got my biases and all that. So that's why, honestly, I wish we had a computer system. We don't need a committee anymore. John Gassaway talks about this all the time on the men's side. I think you follow him on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't need it on the women's side either.
True.
The committee doesn't have to exist. We could use computers to do this in an objective way, and it would be, I think, just lead to a better product overall.
Yeah, that is true. I feel like you have to have the right number first, though, because I don't know that the net is quite there to be the computer that decides who's out.
Not the net. The John Gassaway one is strength of record. I also like wins above bubble.
Yeah.
Last year, I know I kind of got on that train a little bit, but it really needs to be a number that takes into account wins and losses and doesn't take into account running up the score.
Yeah.
In my opinion, because I don't think there should be an incentive to run up the score. And right now the net does take into account margin, which is really important in terms of predicting a win.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a little bit different than rewarding
right
past performance of the season. these are all just my opinions. I know there's people who disagree with me. That's fine. I'm kind of opinionated on this stuff, but to each their own, whatever. Not trying to slam anyone. I'm personally in favor of no more committee.
Yeah, no, I think
no shade to who's on the committee.
It would be an interesting approach. I think some of the things in college that make it harder is like things like, the injury considerations and especially like in a COVID situation. Like I think these years have made it harder, but at the same time, like I don't think that we're seeing the same treatment of injuries from top to bottom of the seeding. Like I think you see it in top, sure, like there was definitely adjustments made for your big teams, but like Florida Gulf Coast being a 12 when they lost, I think 2 games this season, one of them they didn't have Kirsten Belfort. Like I think that tells you everything you need to know about how injuries were considered when you got down to some of the the lower teams. I mean, a team like Villanova too, right? 11 seed were like talked about as being on the bubble when they didn't have Maddie Seacrest for the majority of their losses. I think same thing, and their team that pulled off, I think the last episode that we haven't spoken about yet, is a double-digit seed, beat BYU in the first round as well. So they made it on to the next round too. So not a true mid-major again, Big East team, but a team that still I think got a little underrated. Maddie Seacrest, the player that's one of the best players in the country that doesn't necessarily get any the hype that the best players in the country tend to get.
Yeah, second leading scorer in the country, and I'll bet if you polled people who are watching all these games, almost everyone would have been able to tell you that Caitlin Clark was the leading scorer in the country. Right. And if you asked them who's right behind her, no one would have had any idea. No one maybe have even heard of whoever's right behind her. But she's been a bucket. She's been a baller all season long, and she gets hers in so many different ways. It's fun to watch too, in a lot different ways than Caitlin Clark. Mm-hmm. Cutting, obviously, and a lot of off-ball movement, and she's a knockdown shooter as well. But it was really cool to get to see the world kind of see her twice, 80 minutes of national TV because they pulled off that win. And I will say, I hate when the teams that are victims of those upsets are also mid-major teams, like BYU. But I can't be upset about it. Villanova played well and they deserved it. They've been a good team all year, like you said, impacted by injury a little bit earlier on. By the way, if the committee really, really took injuries into account, I think UConn would have been a 1 seed over Louisville, but maybe I don't know.
I could see the argument for that, but I'm not going to make that argument because I think I'm going to let people have that. Doesn't tell me that I'm biased.
We'll see. We'll see how many I get, but I'm feeling spicy today, so I'm just going in. Yeah. The injuries is a tough one because if you look at pro leagues, they don't take into account injuries.
Right.
If someone gets hurt in WNBA and they end up getting the 9 seed and then their star comes back at the end of the season, too bad. You're not in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how I feel about it though. On one hand, it would be nice to take that into account and reward teams or not punish them if someone were hurt, but then you do have to be subjective again. And subjective is kind of hard because humans, we kind of suck at stuff. So I don't know. I could be swayed either way if someone wants to convince me on that kind of thing. I'm pretty open, but that's an interesting one as well. But yeah, like you said, Villanova, really cool. And they hung with Michigan for about 3+ quarters too on the road. So they can hoop.
Yeah, and this is a Villanova team too. That's going to be really good next year as well. I mean, Maddie Seacrest is only a junior; she'll be back. Their point guard, who has been really good for them this season, Lucy Olsen, is only a freshman. So like this team is just only getting better. I think a lot of these teams, right? A lot of these teams are going to benefit from that 5th year. They're going to have people back. I think that's part of why we're seeing a lot of these big upsets. You've got a lot of experience on some of these rosters, which is definitely helping as well. So it's going to be exciting for next year too. Like, I don't think this is going away. It's going to keep happening.
Yeah, I think Villanova's only losing 1 player from their rotation unless someone transfers or something, if I remember correctly. Is that right? You're the Big East guru.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's just 1. So like they've got a lot coming back. It's still a young team, so they're going to get better. They've got good pieces coming in as well. So I think, the team that's going to be hanging around. They're going to be looking to beat UConn again next year in the Big East. That's for sure.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be another, 10 years since UConn lost the conference game before they lost out. I don't think it's good. However long, maybe it's 2 years. I don't know. We'll see it again though.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the Big East, and I think UConn being back helps this, right? Because it helps with recruiting and stuff to have a team like UConn in your league that players want to play against and be a part of a league that's going to be considered one of the better leagues. But I think you're seeing it at DePaul right now with Anissa Morrow. You're seeing it at Villanova with Maddie Segrist and what they have coming in. Creighton is a really, really good team. I think, like we said, underrated, but a very good basketball team. Seton Hall has had potential. They didn't quite make the tournament this year, Marquette. So I think the Big East is definitely on the rise. That's why it feels a little odd to talk about them as a mid-major, not just because UConn's in it, but I think you're starting to see the top half. I think more of the Big East is going to compete, I think, on a national level very soon. So then I don't really think you can call it a mid-major.
Yeah, there probably will be a time pretty soon where it's the consensus that the Big East is not a mid-major top to bottom. They're playing really well in the WNIT too. Marquette's been doing a great job. So, I think that tells you something about a league too.
Yeah. I mean, they have as many teams in the Sweet 16 as the SEC does. So I had to throw that in there. I'm sorry.
Super meaningful. You heard it here from Megan Gauer. The Big East is as good of a league, top to bottom, as the SEC. That's what I heard.
I didn't say top to bottom. The top. Well, we won't get into my picks of the SEC right now. Anyway. All right. Well, I think that's it for today. We've got Sweet 16, Elite 8 regionals coming up next weekend. Calvin and I will hopefully be coming to you. We'll be coming to you live from Minneapolis. Hopefully, live podcasting too from Minneapolis in a couple weeks. So. Well, less than 2 weeks now, so yeah, exciting.
Like 10 days. Yeah. So pumped.
All right, thanks for joining me, Calvin.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Megan.
Well, that's all for today's episode. Thank you for listening. As always, make sure you rate, like, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to us. Also, be sure to subscribe to the stats site, herhoopstats.com, for all the stats you need, especially during the NCAA tournament. And be sure to subscribe to our Substack newsletter, which is free, to get all of our best content in your inbox. And lastly, be sure you're following us on social media at Her Hoop Stats on all platforms. We'll be at a lot of the regionals and the Final Four, so follow along for the rest of the tournament with us. Thanks again for listening.